Hey everyone, welcome back to the Maximum Human Potential YouTube channel. Today's topic is going to be about how a good coach can individualize the volume, frequency, and intensity for a specific client. Today we're going to talk more about volume and frequency and talk about how these can dramatically change from one client to the other and can dramatically change throughout the lifetime of an athlete. Now, I'll just give you a quick example to show you how much this can actually change things. So I'll use myself. So there was a time, probably about it was only really about 3 years ago now, it would have been 2017. So yeah, rough 3-4 years ago, 2017, early 2018. And I was making some great progress on a squat. I had one block of training where I squatted 6 times a week. So it was 4 days a week, but twice a week I'd squat twice a day. And my squat increased 20 kilos in 8 weeks. So 200 kilos of 4 to 220 kilos of 4 reps. So some really good progress there. Now, the funny thing is these days I only squat once a week, and that's plenty. And I actually get dramatic progress from doing that. If everything lines up, I can pretty much make similar gains now with once a week frequency. So 6 times a week was required at one point, now once a week. So that's pretty fascinating. And I want to delve into some of the reasons why that's the case. So first of all, before I go back to my example, which I'll explain that later as we go along, it'll make more sense. Let's look at just some of the overall factors that can influence how much frequency and how much volume someone can actually tolerate and recover from. And this can be applied to basically any sport. The thing about strength training that makes it unique, though, is it's uniquely fatiguing compared to a lot of other sports. So frequency has to be a lot lower. A lot of skill-based sports you can pretty much practice on a daily basis. But it gives us a really unique lens looking at weight training and what can the human body tolerate from this very, very targeted form of exercise. So let's look at some of these factors. Now, I'll have to shout out to Chad Wesley Smith, who's probably the best guy, the best example I've seen of someone who's explained this concept and really elucidated how you actually apply it in a coaching context. He actually has this list of basically factors that it can influence your training volume, and then he assigns a number of points, and then you can actually subtract sets. So it's an interesting system. I look up some of his books on powerlifting. I've got a few YouTube videos. Just look up Juggernaut Training Systems, Chad Wesley Smith. But I'm going to use his stuff as a framework and give my own 2 cents on each factor. So first up, we've got gender. Now, for me, this actually isn't a consideration whatsoever. So if you read the conventional sort of literature, conventional articles, conventional wisdom, you hear a lot of people saying women can tolerate this insane amount of volume. And I've just found that not to be the case. The reason that this outdated belief is because most women are just severely undertrained and aren't lifting anywhere near their maximum potential. When I actually have the generally women I train are fairly experienced, and they can actually overtrain fairly easily. And they don't actually require these insane volumes that some people think they need to progress. So, yeah, I'll just put that out there. So, basically, I don't really consider gender. I just consider body weight and strength. So, let's say I had a woman come to me who's 60 kilos and squatting 60 kilos for reps. I'll put them on a crap ton of volume and frequency because they can tolerate it. Let's say there's another lady who's 90 kilos and is squatting 180 kilos. I'll dramatically reduce the amount of volume because they're lifting 3 times more than the other example. They've got a lot more body weight. So I almost just look at them. I look at a woman as if they're a guy almost, of the same body weight, and that I program accordingly. The main difference I find is sometimes they can, on certain lifts, if you keep the percentages low, they can hit quite a bit of volume for more weeks than a man would require before a deload. So that is a factor. Like often guys will need more frequent deloads on deadlifts. Some women, if you keep the intensity at the appropriate level, you can actually progress for months without deloading, just sort of shuffling the weights back and forth, but never a true, speed work or a deload week. So that's kind of interesting. And then another factor will be, just things like, not being as good at pull-ups generally until we've really established that base. And that's generally just from the sports they've done in the youth, just less upper body sort of training early on. So we need more of a high volume base. Also, potentially less androgen receptors in the upper body. So we need a lot more volume in the upper body. But again, that's I'm not looking at it, okay, they're women, therefore they need more upper body volume. I'm looking at the numbers that are hitting on those exercises in the upper body. And if a guy came to me who was hitting the same numbers, I'd give him the same amount of volume. So I think the gender thing can really crowd judgment. I'd actually just treat them like any other athlete. Another other major difference that can come up is because we haven't got testosterone, accelerating muscle growth and basically increasing results from training, the jumps between weeks sometimes have to be less. So we'll have to use sometimes, instead of jumping 10 kilos in a week for a guy, in progression, we might have to be 2.5 or 5 kilos for a female. So there are a few of the differences, but essentially I throw that one out there. I just get rid of that and I just look at them in terms of the absolute load they're lifting and their training background, rather than saying, okay, they're a girl, let's treat them differently. No, it's all the same. If a guy and a girl have the same lifts, they'll have a very similar training program. Now, let's look at body weight. So body weight is one of the major factors where it's gonna make a huge difference in how I'm going to program for someone. So under 80 kilo athletes can tolerate a huge amount of volume. Under 90 kilo athletes, the same. And then 105s, you start to run into these recovery issues where, okay, we're doing this big vent session and then we're battling to recover from us squatting and deadlifting the same week. So we're going to start rotating. Okay, we do a different event every week to keep them fresh. And we'll have to cycle intensities on squat and deadlift. We might have to deprioritize one or the other. We might have to squat and deadlift on the same day to recover for events. Just, multiple different ways of attacking the issue. But you have to kind of get some kind of rotation in so they're fresh rather than just being beat up. So what actually causes this? Well, essentially it's just a difference in muscle mass. So we assume in strength sports that body weight is correlated with muscle mass. That isn't always the case, but hopefully it's the case. And if you've got more muscle mass, that means more muscle damage from a workout, more work to recover from. So that's basically the reason is if you're bigger, you've got way more tissue to recuperate after a workout, but your nerve system, your organs, all your bodily functions, your digestive system, neuroendocrine system, they actually don't increase proportionally. So let's say we have a 100 kilo man and a 200 kilo man. Their digestive system of the 200 kilo man and the neuroendocrine system, all these bodily systems which will actually repair the muscle tissue, they are larger than the 100 kilo man, but they're not twice as large. So that means he's going to take a lot longer to recover from the same volume and workload as an 100 kilo man. So that's a big factor there. And that's really the major factor with my squat frequency dropping from 6 times a week to 1 time a week. It's just body weight. I was, I put on, 15 plus kilos of muscle mass, and that really tipped me over the edge in terms of what I could recover from, and I had to dramatically cut back in frequency and volume. Okay, another factor is height. So the taller someone is, there's obviously more muscle damage per repetition. It's just more taxing. There's more distance, the load's being moved through a great distance, so a greater power output for a given repetition. So that's a big factor. If you're shorter, you can probably handle a bit more sets, a little bit more frequency than a taller person. Okay, let's talk about strength. Now, this is obviously a major factor. The greater loads you're lifting, and also the greater intent with which you lift those loads is going to impact how well you recover and how much frequency and volume you can tolerate. So, pretty simple example here. If someone can squat 100 kilos, you could probably get them doing 20 sets a week very, very easily, if even more in some cases. But if someone can squat 400 kilos, they're not going to be squatting 20 sets a week because they're so strong that would completely overwhelm their recovery capabilities. So a good way of looking at this, when you're programming volume, look at sets times reps times weight, so you get like a total tonnage. And as your strength increases, we want to maintain, slightly increase that total tonnage per week, but not excessively to the point where we're not longer recovering. And that will necessitate a reduction in number of sets. Another factor, training age. So training age, how long have they been training properly? So this can be a tricky one because often people will mess around for the first few years of training because that can cloud things, but we generally look at progressive overload with a plan, with a coach, how long have they been training? And if it's a very long period of time, you become able to exert yourself extremely well in a less sets basically. So if someone's been training 1 year, 10 of their sets might basically be equal to someone who's been training 12 years. So this is an interesting one because there is something to be said for you can build up to tolerating certain volumes. So someone after 1 year of training versus 3 years, the person who's been training 3 years might be able to handle quite a bit more workload. They might be able to build up to training twice a day, for example. But then as they go along, it actually reaches a point where now the volume has been progressively increasing. And then once they reach a certain level, the volume actually has to decrease again. So guys like Boris Shiko, he's got, who's a famous powerlifting coach, he's got lists of the average number of lifts for various weight classes and qualifications of lifter. So basically how good a lifter is in powerlifting. And what he found was the really advanced guys had to use less weights. Likewise, if you read some of the Russian, some of the Chinese sort of Olympic weightlifting methodologies, what you'll find is the world record holders in every lift always use less volume than the people who are ranked below them. Now, this doesn't mean that less volume from the get-go will get those results, but it means that once you attain a certain level of expertise, you don't require as many sets and reps, and you can actually reduce them dramatically and still get the same results. So that's really something to bear in mind, and really kicks to the curb that whole idea of, the more you work, the better results you get. Yes, that's true up until a point, but there comes a time in your training age where more work, more sets, more days per week, more training sessions per day is actually counterproductive because you can produce so much intensity. So it's not about how much work you do, it's how much appropriate work you do for where you're at. So that's something interesting. So this carries over to a lot of different sports. The best in the world do less work than people that are one level below them. So just keep that in mind. All right, another thing, age. So the younger someone is, obviously you can then tolerate more training volume. Also, potentially the scope of effective volume is increased. So what does that mean? Well, it means that they can get away with doing less work and still respond, and getting away with more work and still respond, whereas as you get older, you'll really have to fine tune and get that optimal and really nail that optimal number of volume and frequency in order to progress. Whereas if you're younger, the window of opportunity, the window of programs that work essentially is a much larger. All right, so that's so that was biological age. We talked about training age, and then just the general ones: diet, sleep, stress. So if you've got a high inner calorie surplus, a high nutrient, micronutrient dense diet, you're going to recover faster and be able to tolerate more work. Likewise, sleep, if you get more sleep, you're able to tolerate more work. Stress, so work and life stress are going to obviously interfere with your ability to tolerate volume. Lastly, we've got sporting background. So if you're coming from a very high volume sporting background, if you're an elite athlete as a child or a young adult, and you did multiple sessions per day, that's going to really carry over into your adult life. and enable you to handle more volume in a strength sport. So there's a few examples. One that comes to mind was when Nas started training with me. So he came from a CrossFit background. There's another guy, Mark Thomas, who set the New Zealand log and deadlift records a few years ago. So Mark and Na, both coming from a CrossFit background, they could tolerate some insane amounts of volume, especially Mark. So had also done quite a bit of endurance stuff. So, his first few programs, we're doing 10 by 10s on everything leading up to Arnold's, which are not the Arnold's Australian Day, which he ended up winning. And he tolerated some insane volume, just like an absolute champion. So some of the things that I gave him, I'd just never give to another athlete, probably again. Things like 10 sets of 10 on stones. And he recovered, that was only every second week, but he recovered from that perfectly, and it peaked him really well for the comp. Now, the interesting thing was, as we went on, his recoverable volume, and again, he got strong, a lot stronger, was able to output more intensity. The volume he could recover from actually decreased quite dramatically in a very short period of time. And this is something I find with a lot of my clients. So initially, they often come from a place where they haven't done a lot of volume. I'll really hit them with that volume to get the response I'm after. And then when they make a really big jump in strength, they could put 20 kilos on almost every lift in the first, 3-4 months in some cases. Because there's such a big strength gain, that necessitates a big reduction in volume. So I'll just repeat that again in a different way. So if you make a large gain in strength in a short period of time, volume must decrease dramatically. So that's something to keep in mind when coaching an athlete. Anyway, so there's just a few examples of how training volume and frequency can just vary very, very dramatically. So let's just keep that in mind when you plan out your next program, and look at these factors and just try to work at a plan that's best for you, that's not copying someone else, not trying to exceed the volume that someone else is doing. And let's do the appropriate volume rather than the maximum volume. Okay, so any comments, questions below, just comment below and let me know what you thought of the video.